$12 million in liquid cash. That was the number the lawyer read out for my sister, Jessica. My parents didn't even try to hide their smirks. My father slid a single, crinkled envelope across the mahogany table toward me. It was a job application for a rival vineyard. "Go earn your own," he sneered. My pulse didn't even spike. In viticulture, you learn early that sudden shifts in the environment kill the weak vines first. I simply stared at the paper, then back at the lawyer. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I haven't finished reading the clause regarding the land and the brand. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." Mr. Henderson didn't just read the next line. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick bundle of letters tied with rough twine. My breath hitched. I recognized the handwriting on the envelopes immediately. It was mine. For 3 years, I had written to my grandfather every week, updating him on my viticulture studies, my experiments with soil pH, and my life. Every single one had been returned to me with a red stamp that read, "Refused by addressee." My parents had told me he was ashamed of me. They told me he wanted nothing to do with the granddaughter who preferred dirt to debutante balls. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read a handwritten letter attached to the bundle. "To my dearest Jasmine," it began. His voice trembled slightly, channeling the rasp of the man who had taught me how to prune a vine before I could ride a bike. "I know you think I abandoned you. I know you think I sent these letters back. I did not. I hired a private investigator 3 years ago when the first letter was intercepted. I watched your parents mark them refused. I watched them lie to you, and I watched them lie to me, telling me you were too busy to visit a dying old man." My mother let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. My father went rigid, his face draining of color. The lawyer continued reading. "I could have intervened then," Grandpa wrote. "I could have shouted and screamed. But I knew that if I confronted them while I was alive, they would just find new ways to manipulate the narrative. They would gaslight you. They would cut you off. I had to wait. I had to let them build their own trap. I had to wait until I was gone, until they felt safe enough to show their true greed, to ensure that when the steel jaws of this will snapped shut, there would be no escape." This was the silent watchman's regret. He hadn't ignored me. He had been suffering in silence, gathering evidence, enduring the isolation just to ensure I would be the one holding the gavel when the time came. Mr. Henderson set the letter down and picked up the legal document. "Therefore, to the only member of this family who understands that wine is made in the vineyard, not the boardroom, I leave the entirety of the Silverleaf estate. This includes the mansion, the 300 acres of vines, the production facilities, and the intellectual property rights to the Midnight Vintage formula. The current valuation of these assets is $108 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Jessica blinked, looking from her $12 million check to me, doing the math in her head. She had received a fortune, yes, but I had received the kingdom. I had received the source of the fortune. Without the estate, without the Midnight Vintage brand, their cash was finite. My inheritance was a living, breathing engine of wealth. My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "There must be a mistake," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Arthur was senile. He didn't know what he was signing. I rose from my chair in the corner of the room, the chair they had assigned to me, away from the main table. My boots struck the hardwood floor with a heavy, rhythmic thud, the only sound in the cavernous library. I stopped at the head of the long mahogany table, right where my father was standing. I looked him in the eye, my expression completely blank. "You are in my seat," I said. "Move." They shuffled away from the table like scolded children. My mother's face was a mask of shock, her perfectly applied foundation cracking under the strain of reality. My father looked as if he had been punched in the gut. As I settled into the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, the scent of old paper and beeswax surrounded me. It smelled like Grandpa. It smelled like the only safety I had ever known. For years, they had told the world that the Midnight Vintage was my father's creation. They told investors it was his genius that blended the Cabernet Franc with the Petit Verdot to create the estate's signature bottle, but the truth was buried under my fingernails, stained with the purple juice of grapes I had harvested by hand. While Jessica was posting photos from yachts in Ibiza, spending the company allowance on bottle service, I was in the vineyard at 3 a.m, fighting frost with nothing but smudge pots and exhaustion. I knew the exact pH balance of the soil in Sector 4. I knew which vines needed pruning before the sun rose. I knew the fermentation tanks better than I knew my own bedroom. I didn't just work here. I was the root system of this entire operation. But to them, I was invisible. I was the help. I was the reliable engine in the basement that kept the lights on in their penthouse. People often asked me, usually with pity in their eyes, why I stayed. Why did I endure the snide comments, the exclusion from family dinners, the erasure of my name from the awards? They didn't understand the invisible chains of the survivor. When you are raised in a house where love is a transaction you can never afford, you learn to make yourself indispensable. You learn that silence is not weakness, it is camouflage. I stayed because I knew that if I left, the vines would die. I stayed because this land loved me back in a way my parents never could. I built a fortress of competence around myself, brick by brick, knowing that one day, competence would outlast charisma. But the letters, that was the wound that never calloused over. Every Sunday, I sat at my small desk in the guest cottage, because I wasn't allowed in the main house after 10 at night, and poured my heart out to the man who taught me everything. I wrote about the sugar levels in the harvest. I wrote about the new irrigation system I designed. I wrote about how much I missed him. And every week, I would find the envelope in my mailbox a few days later, stamped with that hateful red ink. Refused. I thought he hated me. I thought he had finally seen me through my parents' eyes as a failure, as a burden. I didn't know that my mother was intercepting the mail truck at the gate. I didn't know my father was the one stamping them, probably laughing as he tossed them back into the outgoing pile. They wanted me to feel isolated. They wanted me to believe I had no allies, so I would keep my head down and keep working. They made a fatal calculation. They thought isolating me would break me. Instead, it sharpened me. It turned my sadness into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I stopped looking for their approval and started looking for their mistakes. I stopped trying to be their daughter and started training to be their replacement. The deed felt heavy in my hands, a physical anchor to the soil. It wasn't just a legal document, it was a receipt. I had paid for this estate with my youth, my silence, and my labor. And now, the transaction was complete. The silent investor was finally cashing out. You would think that losing $100 million estate would humble a person. You would think the exposure of their cruelty would shame them into silence. But my family has never known shame. They only know entitlement. The shock on their faces didn't dissolve into regret. It hardened into fury. Jessica was the first to recover. She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress, and let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You think I care about this dusty old farm?" She scoffed, waving her hand at the library walls lined with first edition viticulture books. "Keep it. Keep the dirt and the bugs and the endless work. I have $12 million. I can buy my own vineyard in Napa by the end of the week. I can hire people to do the work while I actually enjoy my life." She looked at me with pity, as if inheriting the empire was a punishment. "You're welcome to it, Jasmine. Have fun rotting here all alone." She didn't understand. She saw land as a liquid asset, something to be traded for status. She didn't understand that you cannot buy a soul for a vineyard. You have to grow it. Then my mother stepped forward. Her initial shock had been replaced by that familiar, condescending mask of concern she used whenever she wanted to control me. "Jasmine, darling," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You're misinterpreting the letters. We didn't keep them from Arthur to hurt you. We did it to protect him." I stared at her, blinking once. "To protect him?" "Yes," she continued, gaining confidence. "You were going through such a difficult phase. You were so obsessed with the work, so isolated. We didn't want him to worry about your stability. We told him you were busy, that you were thriving. because the truth that you were hiding in a guest cottage writing desperate letters would have broken his heart. We were protecting his peace. Jasmine, and we were protecting you from your own neediness. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. In 2 sentences, she had rewritten history, turning their malicious isolation of me into an act of benevolent parenting. She had turned my grief into instability. A younger version of me might have screamed. I might have tried to argue the facts. But the CEO of Silverleaf Estate didn't argue with liabilities. She liquidated them. My father was the most dangerous. He hadn't said a word since I took the head chair. He had walked over to the sidebar, where a decanter of the midnight vintage, my vintage, was sitting. He poured himself a glass, the dark red liquid swirling against the crystal. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wine, swirling it aggressively. "You think a piece of paper makes you the owner?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I built this brand. I took your grandfather's rustic hobby and turned it into a global luxury label. I shook the hands. I closed the deals. This wine is mine." He took a sip, then spat it onto the Persian rug. A dark purple stain bloomed on the antique wool. "If you think I'm going to walk away and let you hand my legacy over to a girl who smells like fertilizer, you are mistaken," he said, finally turning to face me. His eyes were dead. There was no father there, only a cornered predator. "I know where the electrical panels are in the fermentation shed. I know how flammable the barrel room is. If I can't have this estate, Jasmine, I will burn it to the ash you rose from." The threat hung heavy in the air, smelling of tannins and violence. He wasn't just refusing to leave. He was declaring war. He was willing to destroy the very thing he claimed to love just to keep me from having it. I looked at the stain on the rug. Then I looked at the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who was already reaching for his phone, his face pale. I didn't need to say anything. My father had just handed me the match, and he didn't even realize I was holding the gasoline. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I simply looked past my father's shoulder to the heavy oak doors of the library. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice level. "You can come in now." The doors opened immediately. James Sterling, the estate's head of security for 20 years, a man who had watched me grow up from the periphery, who had seen me crying behind the tractor shed more times than he would ever admit, stepped inside. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman in a sharp charcoal suit holding a tablet. This was the forensic accountant I had retained 3 days ago. My father's bluster evaporated instantly. He took a stumbling step back, nearly knocking over the crystal decanter. "Sterling," he barked, trying to summon the authority of a master who had just been deposed. "Get this girl out of my chair. She's trespassing." Sterling didn't move. He didn't even look at my father. He looked directly at me, his expression respectful and awaiting command. "Miss Jasmine," he said, a subtle shift in title that hit the room like a gavel. "We have secured the fermentation shed and the barrel room as you requested. The local fire marshal has been notified of a potential threat to the property." I nodded. "Thank you, James." I turned my gaze back to my parents. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Any furniture, art, jewelry, or items purchased with estate funds remain here pending the audit." "Audit?" my mother squeaked, her hand fluttering to her throat. "This is Miss Klein," I gestured to the woman in gray. "She is currently reviewing the last 10 years of estate ledgers. Every expense, every consulting fee, every business trip to the Maldives." Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes and pulling out her phone. "God, this is so boring. I'm booking a first-class ticket to Cabo. If I have $12 million, I don't need to listen to this servant drama." She tapped furiously on her screen, her long acrylic nails clicking against the glass. Then she frowned. She tapped again, harder. "What the hell?" she muttered. "Card declined? That's impossible. It's a black card." "The corporate cards are frozen, Jessica," I said, my voice cutting through her confusion like shears through a vine. "And your inheritance is currently in escrow pending the investigation into the estate's finances. If the audit shows that estate funds were misappropriated to support your lifestyle, your gambling debts, your cars, your wardrobe, that amount will be deducted from your 12 million before you see a dime. There is a fascinating psychological phenomenon regarding the illusion of power in an empty wallet. My family walked through the world like giants. They treated waitstaff like furniture and laws like suggestions because they believed their net worth was a character trait. They thought their arrogance was innate, a biological superiority. But it wasn't. It was leased. It was a costume rented with Grandpa's money. The moment the credit limit hit zero, the posture collapsed. They weren't powerful people having a bad day. They were parasites realizing the host had finally cut them off. Their confidence was nothing but a reflection in a mirror I had just shattered. My mother looked at my father, waiting for him to fix it, to yell, to make the problem go away. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Miss Klein, who was scrolling through a digital ledger with the dispassionate focus of a shark. He knew what she was going to find. He knew that the threat of arson was a child's tantrum compared to the legal avalanche that was about to bury him. 24 hours, I repeated, standing up to signal the meeting was over. If you are not off the property by noon tomorrow, Mr. Sterling will escort you out. And Dad? I paused, allowing myself a single cold smile. If a single vine is damaged, I won't just sue you, I will erase you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Miss Klein didn't need 24 hours. She needed 20 minutes in the climate-controlled archive room beneath the main cellar. While my parents were upstairs frantically packing their designer luggage, she pulled a single, leather-bound ledger from a shelf hidden behind a false panel. It wasn't digital. My grandfather didn't trust the cloud. He trusted ink and paper. This is the smoking gun, she said, laying the book open on the tasting table. The pages were filled with columns of numbers written in my father's cramped, aggressive handwriting, but it wasn't the numbers that made my blood run cold. It was the signatures at the bottom of the patent transfer documents clipped inside. Jasmine Henderson, Jasmine Henderson, Jasmine Henderson. Dozens of them. All authorizing the transfer of the Midnight Vintage formula to a shell company owned solely by my father. All signed while I was supposedly unavailable. The dates corresponded perfectly to the weeks I was most buried in harvest work, sleeping 4 hours a night, too exhausted to think straight, let alone review legal documents. He forged my signature, I whispered, tracing the ink with a trembling finger. He stole the patent. He didn't just take credit for the wine. He legally stole it from the estate so he could sell it separately. It's worse than that, Miss Klein said, her voice grim. She flipped to the back of the ledger. Look at the withdrawals from the estate trust, the trust your grandfather set up to maintain the property and pay the staff. I looked. The numbers were staggering. $200,000 wire transferred to a casino in Monaco, $50,000 to a luxury car dealership, monthly payments of $10,000 to an account labeled consulting fees that traced back to a woman I knew was my father's mistress. Over 5 years, he had drained nearly $4 million from the estate's operating capital. He was bleeding us dry, I realized, the horror settling in my stomach like lead. That's why he cut corners on the bottling line. That's why he refused to upgrade the irrigation system. He wasn't saving money, he was stealing it. This isn't just mismanagement, Miss Jasmine, Miss Klein said, closing the book with a heavy thud. This is grand larceny, embezzlement, forgery, wire fraud. If we take this to the district attorney, your father isn't just looking at bankruptcy. He's looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I stared at the ledger. For years, I had thought my father was just a narcissist, a man too in love with his own reflection to see his daughter. But he was something much simpler and much darker. He was a thief. He had looked at his own father's legacy and seen nothing but a piggy bank to smash open. And Jessica? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Her signature is on the co-signed documents for the shell company, Miss Klein said. Whether she knew what she was signing or not, she's legally implicated. She received dividends from the stolen patent funds. That money bought her condo. It paid for her trips. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The last tendril of guilt, the tiny voice that whispered, "They're still your family," finally snapped. They weren't family. They were a syndicate. Can we recover the funds? I asked. We can claw back the assets, Miss Klein confirmed. We can file an immediate injunction against Jessica's inheritance, since the $12 million came from the estate, and she owes the estate $4 million in stolen funds plus damages. We can freeze her payout entirely until the restitution is settled. I nodded slowly. Do it. File the injunction. Call the DA. And Miss Klein? Make sure the police are here when we tell them. I want a witness when their world ends. The discovery of that ledger was the final nail. It transformed my father from a pathetic, displaced patriarch into a felon. He hadn't just been mean to me. He had been actively, criminally dismantling my future to fund his vices. There was no going back from this. No reconciliation. No forgiveness. There was only the law. And for the first time in my life, the law was on my side. The rain started just before noon the next day. A cold, persistent drizzle that turned the vineyard soil into slick mud. I stood on the other side of the heavy iron gates, watching the procession of luxury cars idle on the other side. My parents were there. Jessica was there. Their trunks were packed with whatever they could carry in 24 hours, designer clothes, jewelry, a few small pieces of art. The rest, the antique furniture, the wine collection, the life they had built on stolen money remained inside, secured by Mr. Sterling's team. My mother was the first to approach the gate. She wasn't wearing her usual impeccable suit. She was in a raincoat, her hair frizzy from the humidity, her face streaked with mascara. She gripped the bars like a prisoner. "Jasmine, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "You can't do this. We have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. We can't even check into a hotel. We're your parents. We raised you." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I saw the fear in her eyes, yes, but I also saw the calculation. Even now, she was trying to manipulate me. She was banking on the daughter she thought she knew, the one who craved approval, the one who would set herself on fire to keep them warm. But that daughter died the day she read Grandpa's letter. "You raised me," I agreed, my voice calm over the sound of the rain. "You raised me to be quiet. You raised me to be useful. And you raised me to handle crises while you took the credit. So, I'm handling this one. Jasmine, stop this madness," my father shouted from the driver's seat of his Mercedes. He didn't get out. He couldn't bear to look me in the eye. "Open the gate! This is my house." "It was never your house, Dad," I said loud enough for him to hear. "It was Grandpa's. And now it's mine. And you're trespassing." Jessica got out of her car then. She walked up to the gate, her expensive heels sinking into the mud. She looked furious, but underneath the anger, I saw terror. She had never had to fend for herself. She had never faced a consequence she couldn't buy her way out of. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think this makes you powerful? You're just a sad, lonely girl with a big house and no family. You're going to rot in there." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had survived the rot and bloomed anyway. "I'm not lonely, Jessica," I said. "I have the vines. I have the staff who actually respect me. And I have the truth." I reached into the tote bag hanging from my shoulder and pulled out a single bottle of wine. The label was dark, elegant, with silver lettering. Midnight vintage. I walked up to the gate and slid the bottle through the bars. Jessica stared at it. Confused. "Take it," I said. She hesitated, then grabbed the neck of the bottle. "Drink this," I said, my voice low and final. "It tastes like the daughter you forgot. It tastes like 3 a.m. shifts and frozen fingers. It tastes like the letters you returned. It's the last thing you will ever get from this estate." I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The heavy iron gates began to close with a mechanical hum. My mother screamed my name one last time. My father slammed his hand against his steering wheel. Jessica stood there in the mud, clutching the bottle of wine like it was a lifeline. As the gates clicked shut, locking with a definitive thud, I didn't feel triumph. I felt silence. The noise of their demands, their criticism, their endless need, it was all gone. I turned my back on them and walked up the long driveway toward the mansion. The rain washed over me, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clean. If you've ever been the one doing the work while others took the credit, share this story. Let them know we see them. It has been 6 months since the gates closed. The autumn rains have given way to the crisp, dormant silence of winter, and the vines are sleeping. The estate is quiet now. It is a different kind of quiet than before. It isn't the silence of secrets or suppression. It is the silence of peace. I spent the morning in the bottling room with Mr. Sterling, who has traded his security uniform for a vineyard manager's vest. We were stripping the labels off the old reserve stock, the bottles that bore my father's signature in gold leaf. We didn't sell them. We didn't drink them. We poured them out. There is a specific spot behind the old oak tree where Grandpa used to sit. The soil there is rocky and thirsty. I took the last bottle of the Robert Henderson Reserve, the wine he claimed he made, the wine that bought his cars and his lies, and I uncorked it. I poured the dark liquid into the dirt. It felt like an exorcism. I was returning the stolen fruit to the earth that grew it, cleansing the soil of his ego. We have a new label now. It's simple, just Silverleaf. Printed on textured paper that feels like the letter Grandpa left me. No gold leaf, no signatures, just the truth of what's inside the bottle. People ask if I'm lonely in this big house. They wonder if I miss the parties, the noise, the family. I tell them that loneliness is being in a room full of people who don't see you. Solitude, on the other hand, is being alone with yourself and liking the company. I walk the rows of vines at sunset, my boots sinking into the earth I own, the earth that knows me, and I have never felt more complete. I realized something during those long nights in the guest cottage, writing letters that I thought would never be read. There are so many of you out there. You are the ones staying late to fix the mistakes the boss made. You are the ones carrying the emotional load for families that call you difficult when you ask for help. You are the ones doing the work in the dark, wondering if anyone will ever notice, wondering if you are foolish for trying so hard when the world seems to reward the loud and the greedy. I am writing this for you. If you are the one holding the flashlight while others take the credit, do not drop it. Keep working. Keep building your competence in the shadows. They think your silence is submission, but they are wrong. Your silence is a library. You are learning their weaknesses. You are learning the machinery of their power better than they know it themselves. They are building their houses on the sand of their own entitlement. You are building yours on the bedrock of your own skill. And one day, the storm will come. It always does. And when their house washes away, you will still be standing. You will be the one holding the deed. Keep going. One day, you will own the light. If you've ever been the one doing the work while others took the credit, share this story. Let them know we see them.